Sophia always believed her life was calm, predictable, and safe, a life painted in soft colors, small joys, and gentle routines that carried her from day to day. Yet beneath that calm surface, a restless whisper lingered in her heart, a feeling she could neither name nor ignore, as if something was quietly missing even in the middle of her perfectly ordinary days. She loved Daniel, her husband, deeply, or at least she thought she did, for he was kind, responsible, and attentive in ways that comforted her. Yet sometimes when he looked at her, Sophia felt a shadow behind his eyes, a distance she couldn't quite reach, and it puzzled her, made her wonder if he too carried secrets or longings he would never share. And though she tried to brush it away, telling herself life wasn't meant to be endlessly exciting, the unease settled into her chest like a small, persistent stone, reminding her that perhaps happiness was not simply living in quiet harmony, but understanding one another fully. And as the weeks passed, that small stone seemed heavier, pressing her to pay attention to things she had ignored before, like Daniel's sudden invitations to go out with friends or his insistence on including her in conversations with people she barely knew, people whose smiles and stories seemed to shimmer with a light Sophia hadn't realized she was missing in her own life. One rainy evening, the kind where the world seems suspended in gray and silver and the air smells faintly of earth and wet leaves, Daniel proposed she join a weekend retreat, something he said would help her reconnect with herself. Though the words felt heavier than they sounded, and though she felt a flutter of hesitation, Sophia knew from experience that Daniel didn't make suggestions lightly, that behind his calm, careful tone, there was an expectation, a subtle pressure that pushed her to comply even when her instincts whispered caution. And she wondered what exactly he meant by reconnect with herself, if it was merely a chance to relax or if it carried intentions she was not yet ready to face. She packed lightly, her mind buzzing with curiosity and unease, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear, wondering if she would meet new people, hear new ideas, perhaps even glimpse parts of herself she had long neglected while keeping her life in order, for she had always been someone who followed rules, kept schedules, and avoided surprises. Yet now, with the rain pattering softly against the windows and the suitcase packed at the foot of her bed, Sophia felt as though she was on the threshold of something unfamiliar, a small doorway that promised change, and that thought both thrilled and terrified her, for she had spent years imagining love as a safe harbor, a place of stability, and now it seemed life was nudging her into uncharted waters where safety and certainty might not exist. And as she glanced at Daniel, who smiled at her with a mixture of warmth and something she could not read fully, a small twinge of doubt passed through her mind, yet she pushed it aside, reminding herself that love sometimes required trust, that marriage was a promise to believe in one another, and perhaps, she told herself, this retreat was merely a harmless adventure, a chance to step out of routine and see the world slightly differently. She arrived at the retreat location, a cozy cabin nestled on the edge of a forest, where the smell of pine and damp earth greeted her and a small group of people were gathered, strangers with friendly faces and easy laughter, and though she felt the initial awkwardness of entering a space where everyone already seemed connected, Sophia soon noticed something she hadn't anticipated, a subtle spark of possibility, a gentle curiosity that made her heart beat a little faster. And in those first conversations, with casual smiles and polite questions, she began to realize that perhaps this weekend could show her parts of herself she had forgotten, parts that had been buried under years of responsibility and routine. And yet, even as she laughed politely, nodded thoughtfully, and listened to stories that felt at once familiar and strange, the small shadow of Daniel's expectation lingered at the edges of her mind, a silent reminder that she was not fully free, that her choices were never entirely her own. And with that awareness, a tension wrapped itself around her heart, both thrilling and terrifying, making her wonder what she would learn, what she might lose, and how far she was willing to let life stretch her comfort and courage. For the retreat was not merely a change of scenery, it was a doorway into possibility, a gentle, almost imperceptible nudge into self-discovery. And with every step she took through the forest trails, listening to birdsong and the crunch of wet leaves beneath her shoes, Sophia felt both lighter and heavier, a paradox she could not explain, as if the world itself were reminding her that life was not a straight line, that love was not merely about safety, and that every choice, even small ones like agreeing to a weekend away, carried with it the weight of unseen consequences. and as she sat by the fireplace that first evening, watching flames dance and listening to the quiet hum of conversation, a sense of anticipation coiled in her chest. A mixture of fear, excitement, and curiosity that whispered that her life, the life she had always thought predictable, might be about to unfold in ways she had never imagined. And as she drifted to sleep that night, Sophia wondered if she was ready to meet the parts of herself that had waited patiently, quietly, for a chance to be seen, for she had always been dutiful, careful, and loyal, yet somewhere beneath those layers, she felt a pulse of longing, a desire for something unspoken, something that might change her heart forever. And in that quiet cabin, surrounded by strangers who would soon become reflections of her own hidden truths, Sophia slept with a mind alive with possibility, unaware that the weekend ahead would test her emotions, her loyalty, and her understanding of love in ways she had never thought possible. And as the first rays of sunlight pierced the misty forest, touching the edges of the cabin, she awoke with a sense of trepidation and wonder, knowing, in the small, inexplicable way that intuition works, that her life was about to bend, twist, and expand beyond the boundaries she had always believed unbreakable. And with that knowledge, Sophia stepped into the new day, ready, unknowingly, to meet experiences that would challenge her, open her heart, and begin a journey toward choices she had never imagined she would face, choices that would shape the woman she was and the life she would come to claim, one delicate, uncertain, and transformative moment at a time. The retreat was nothing like Sophia had imagined, not in the sense of excitement or grandeur, but in how it quietly unraveled the parts of her she had kept hidden for years, for the cabin and its surroundings were serene, the forest stretching endlessly with tall pines and the sound of distant streams, yet within that calm, Sophia discovered a storm of emotions she hadn't anticipated, starting the very first morning when she met Ethan, a man with eyes that seemed to see deeper than her words could explain, and Adrian, whose smile was so effortless it made her heart lift involuntarily even though she reminded herself to stay composed. They were strangers, yes, yet in a way that felt almost immediate, Sophia felt drawn to their presence, to the ease with which conversations flowed, to the subtle ways they listened and responded, as if they were reading between the lines of her life and understanding the truths she hadn't spoken aloud. And while she knew her loyalty to Daniel should keep her cautious, the retreat demanded attention to herself, and she could not deny the warmth of curiosity that grew with every shared story, every laugh, every quiet moment where they simply sat together watching the light shift through the trees. The days moved quickly, almost in a blur, with structured activities meant to foster connection, but Sophia found herself wandering alone at times, walking the winding paths through the misty forest, reflecting on her feelings and the choices she had made to this point in life, realizing that for all her careful planning and dutiful obedience, she had rarely confronted the true yearnings of her heart. And being in this space, with Ethan and Adrian around, she felt emotions she had buried for so long, a mixture of longing, excitement, and gentle guilt that tugged at her conscience, making her question everything she thought she knew about love, commitment, and happiness. Ethan's conversations were deep, often about dreams, regrets, and hopes for the future, and Sophia found herself opening in ways she had forgotten were possible, sharing stories and memories she usually kept tucked away, laughing softly at small joys, and feeling a quiet resonance with him, a sense that someone else could understand the fragments of her heart she had hidden even from herself. While Adrian's presence was different, playful and confident, teasing in ways that made her cheeks flush and her spirits lift, creating moments of lightness and fun that balanced the weight of reflection she carried with her, and together, they created a spectrum of emotion that made Sophia feel alive and seen in a way that was both thrilling and frightening, for she had never experienced such freedom to simply be herself outside the confines of expectation. At meals, they sat together, sharing stories and small jokes, and Sophia noticed the subtle difference between the ordinary politeness of acquaintances and the magnetic pull of those who truly connect, for with each word exchanged, each shared glance, she felt a growing tension between the comfort of her old life and the new possibilities the retreat offered. And though she tried to remind herself of Daniel and the love she had promised, the feelings stirring within her were undeniable, unspoken yet vibrant, delicate yet consuming. And she realized that she was no longer just a visitor at this retreat but a participant in a silent dance of the heart that demanded attention and honesty. As the sun dipped below the horizon on the second evening, painting the sky with shades of rose and gold, the group gathered around a campfire, and Sophia found herself sitting between Ethan and Adrian, listening to the crackle of flames and the faint night sounds of the forest, feeling the pull of connection in ways that were exhilarating and confusing, sensing the complexity of emotions that came from new attachments, from empathy and attraction, from the delicate realization that her heart was capable of expanding beyond the confines of her familiar life, and she felt the weight of every unspoken word, every glance, every smile, every moment where laughter or silence hinted at something more profound than casual friendship, and she began to understand that the retreat was not about simple enjoyment or distraction but about awakening, about allowing herself to recognize parts of her heart that had been dormant under years of habit, duty, and predictability. The nights were quiet, filled with thought and reflection, and when Sophia lay in bed, listening to the gentle rain tapping on the cabin roof or the distant rustle of leaves, she replayed every interaction, every conversation, every subtle touch of understanding or humor that lingered in her mind, realizing that she was experiencing a spectrum of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, a mixture of longing, self-awareness, and a gentle thrill of possibility, and she felt both excitement and fear, for the retreat was not merely a temporary escape but a mirror, reflecting the truths she had been avoiding about herself, her desires, and the choices that might lie ahead, and she began to question everything, the life she had built, the expectations she had followed, the loyalty she had held to Daniel, and the unexplored spaces within her own heart that now beckoned insistently. She walked through the forest trails often, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by Ethan or Adrian, and each step seemed to carry the weight of new awareness, of realization that life was more complex than simple labels of right and wrong, that love could take many forms, that attraction and connection could coexist with commitment, and that her heart was not limited to a single path, and with every conversation, every shared glance, every smile that lingered a little too long, Sophia felt her emotions expanding in ways both gentle and overwhelming, delicate and consuming, and she began to see herself not just as a wife or a woman defined by routine and loyalty, but as a human being capable of choice, reflection, and awakening, capable of confronting her own heart honestly, and though she felt guilt, she also felt exhilaration, for the retreat allowed her to confront the truths she had long ignored. The weekend progressed, and moments of quiet reflection alternated with laughter, conversation, and small adventures through the forest and along the streams, where the air smelled of earth and pine, where sunlight dappled the ground and birdsong filled the silence, and in those moments, Sophia felt alive in ways she hadn't in years, as if life itself had been waiting for her to notice, for her to awaken to possibility, and with Ethan and Adrian present, she discovered that connection and understanding could be gentle, playful, profound, and intimate without needing to cross boundaries, that emotions could stir and hearts could open even in the absence of romantic or physical action, and that sometimes simply being seen, truly seen, was enough to shift the course of one's understanding of love and desire, and she realized that the retreat was teaching her lessons not about temptation, but about awareness, not about betrayal, but about the vastness of human emotion and the courage it took to face it honestly. By the time the retreat drew to a close, Sophia felt a subtle transformation within herself, a quiet awakening of desires, awareness, and longing that would not fade when she returned home, a realization that life, love, and connection were far more complex than she had ever allowed herself to believe, and though she still carried affection and loyalty for Daniel, she knew she had glimpsed a part of herself that could not be ignored, a part of her heart capable of feeling, questioning, and growing in ways that demanded courage, honesty, and reflection, and as she packed her belongings to leave, she looked at Ethan and Adrian with gratitude, understanding that their presence had been a catalyst, a mirror, a gentle nudge into self-discovery, and she carried with her the knowledge that her life had shifted, subtly but irrevocably, that the path ahead would not be the same, and that the weekend retreat had opened a door she could never close, a door into emotional depth, romantic awakening, and the uncharted spaces of her own heart, leaving her both exhilarated and apprehensive, eager and uncertain, fully aware that when she returned to her familiar world, she would have to reconcile these new emotions with the life she had always known, and that the journey of understanding herself, her choices, and her capacity for love had only just begun. When Sophia returned home from the retreat, the familiar walls of her house felt strangely foreign, each corner holding memories of the life she had once believed unshakable, yet now they seemed to echo with new possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. And as Daniel greeted her with his usual calm smile, she felt a mixture of comfort and tension, for she knew that beneath his composed demeanor lay expectations she could sense but not yet fully name, a quiet insistence that she would share her experiences, that he wanted to hear not just the stories of her weekend, but the details of her heart. And even though she wanted to obey and reassure him, she felt a subtle resistance growing inside, a recognition that she had changed in ways he might not understand, and that her own desires were no longer fully hers to hide. Daniel's questions were gentle but persistent, framed as concern and curiosity, yet each one carried an unspoken weight, a pressure that made Sophia's chest tighten as she struggled to navigate honesty without crossing invisible lines. And she realized that his encouragement to open up was both an invitation and a challenge, a subtle test of where her loyalty and her heart truly lay, and that tension pressed upon her like a quiet storm, stirring emotions she had only begun to understand during her time at the retreat. In the quiet of the evening, as the sun dipped beyond the horizon and painted the sky in muted shades of amber and rose, Sophia found herself sitting alone in the living room, replaying every interaction she had experienced over the weekend. Remembering the warmth of Ethan's gaze, the way his voice had seemed to invite trust and reflection, and the effortless charm of Adrian, whose laughter had lifted her spirits and made her feel playful in ways she hadn't felt for years. And she realized that she was caught between worlds, the life she had promised herself, the love she had committed to Daniel, and the awakening of her own heart to emotions that were neither wrong nor simple, but undeniable and deeply stirring. The days that followed were filled with subtle tension, each interaction with Daniel carrying an extra weight, as she noticed the smallest shifts in his expressions, the careful choice of words, the unspoken expectation that she might reveal more than she was ready to. And with each passing moment, Sophia felt the pull of her own curiosity and longing growing, a quiet, insistent force that challenged her assumptions about happiness, fulfillment, and love, reminding her that life was never as simple as she had once imagined, and that the retreat had not been a temporary distraction but a mirror showing her what she had hidden from herself, what she had denied in order to preserve comfort and loyalty. During this period, Sophia spent long hours reflecting, walking through the familiar paths of the neighborhood, noticing the rhythm of life that had once felt safe but now seemed constraining, feeling a strange mix of nostalgia and anticipation, recalling conversations with Ethan about dreams and regrets, the way he had listened as if each word mattered, and with Adrian, the moments of laughter, teasing, and light-hearted joy that had made her feel like a different version of herself, lighter, freer, capable of emotions she had long suppressed. And she realized that these connections were not just fleeting attractions but reflections of the parts of her heart that had waited patiently to be acknowledged. One evening, Daniel invited her for a quiet dinner, a ritual they had maintained for years, and as they sat across from each other, the familiar clinking of cutlery and soft ambient lighting seemed charged with something unsaid, a tension hovering over the table like a fragile thread, and when he spoke, his voice was low, measured, almost tender, asking about her weekend and gently probing for feelings she might have experienced, and Sophia felt a wave of anxiety mixed with longing, the kind that made hearts beat faster and thoughts scatter, for she knew that to answer truthfully might expose desires she wasn't ready to confront, yet to hide them felt like a denial of the person she was becoming, and in that delicate balance, she sensed the unthinkable choice looming, the realization that her loyalty and love for Daniel would be tested, and that her heart could not remain in stasis any longer. As nights passed, Sophia found herself awake long after Daniel had gone to bed, thinking of Ethan's quiet depth, the way he had asked questions that made her reflect, the way he had validated feelings she had never given herself permission to have, and Adrian's vibrant energy, which reminded her of laughter, spontaneity, and the joy of being alive in the moment, and she wondered how to reconcile these emotions with the life she had built, the marriage she valued, and the promises she had made, for she knew that ignoring these stirrings would only make her feel smaller, less alive, less honest, and that she could no longer afford to silence her heart for the sake of comfort. The days blended into a rhythm of work, small conversations, and stolen moments of reflection, each bringing a new awareness of the unspoken dynamics within her marriage, as Daniel continued to show care while also subtly pushing, and Sophia realized that his intentions, though wrapped in love, were influencing her in ways she hadn't recognized before, guiding her toward a choice she hadn't imagined she would face, and in that realization, fear and exhilaration intertwined, making her question the definitions of love, trust, and commitment, forcing her to confront the difficult truth that life, and matters of the heart, were rarely clear-cut, that they required courage, honesty, and the willingness to embrace discomfort in order to grow, and that she was now standing on the edge of such a moment, a place where her next decision could change everything. One afternoon, while sitting in the sunlit living room, Sophia allowed herself to breathe deeply and acknowledge her feelings without judgment, reflecting on the contrast between the predictable life with Daniel and the awakening she had experienced at the retreat, the tension between duty and desire, familiarity and the unknown. And she realized that the unthinkable choice she faced was not merely about loyalty or temptation but about self-awareness, the courage to acknowledge the full spectrum of her emotions, and the willingness to step into vulnerability in order to honor the truth of her heart. As the week progressed, the subtle nudges from Daniel, the reminders of past promises, and the quiet echoes of the retreat combined into a storm of reflection, a pressure that Sophia could neither ignore nor fully escape, and each night, lying awake in the familiar bed that now felt slightly foreign, she weighed every feeling, every glance, every memory, realizing that the choice she was being pushed toward was not simple, and that it would require clarity, honesty, and emotional bravery, for to navigate her own heart authentically meant acknowledging both love and longing, both duty and awakening, and accepting that life rarely offered solutions without complexity. The unthinkable choice, she realized, was not about betraying Daniel in a conventional sense, nor was it about seeking forbidden thrills, but about recognizing that her heart had expanded beyond the confines of habit and expectation, that the connections she had made during the retreat had stirred parts of her soul she could not ignore, and that to honor herself fully, she would have to confront these emotions honestly, with courage and integrity, understanding that love was multifaceted and that true commitment could coexist with awareness of one's own desires, that marriage did not demand the denial of self but the presence of open, conscious choice, and that the journey she faced was one of emotional reckoning, requiring patience, reflection, and gentle courage. By the end of the week, Sophia felt the subtle but undeniable shift within her, a quiet awakening that had been seeded at the retreat and nurtured through moments of reflection, conversation, and longing, and she understood that the unthinkable choice was approaching, a decision that would test her understanding of love, loyalty, and the courage to embrace truth. And as she looked at Daniel that evening, observing the familiar warmth in his eyes, she realized that her heart had grown, that her awareness of desire and connection had deepened, and that the path ahead would not be simple or predictable, but it would be honest. And in that honesty, she found both fear and hope, for she knew that to navigate this moment with integrity was to honor herself, her feelings, and the bonds she had committed to, and that the choice she faced, though unthinkable, was the next step in the journey of understanding who she was, what she wanted, and how she could love authentically in a world full of complexity, emotion, and quiet revelation, a journey that demanded bravery, reflection, and the courage to step forward into the unknown, fully aware of the consequences and fully alive to the possibilities that awaited her heart. The days following Sophia's retreat were a whirlwind of thought, reflection, and quiet tension, each morning bringing the familiar routines of life with Daniel yet colored by the new awareness that her heart had changed, that the retreat had awakened emotions she could not ignore. And each evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the living room, she found herself sitting in silence, replaying memories of Ethan's quiet understanding, his thoughtful gaze that had seemed to read her soul, and Adrian's laughter that had made her feel lighter, freer, and more alive than she had in years. And she realized that these feelings were not fleeting or superficial but a reflection of parts of herself she had long neglected, a deep recognition of her own desires, her own need for connection, intimacy, and emotional resonance. And though she still loved Daniel and valued the life they had built, she knew that she could not ignore this awakening without denying a fundamental part of herself. The unthinkable choice loomed closer with each passing day, not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet, persistent presence in her mind, a gentle pressure that invited reflection, honesty, and courage, and Sophia felt the weight of it in small moments. When Daniel smiled When he asked about her day, when she caught herself longing for a glance or a word from Ethan or Adrian, and she understood that love was not simply about comfort or predictability but about authenticity, about acknowledging emotions, desires, and truths that were often messy, complicated, yet profoundly real, and in that realization, she felt both fear and relief, a mixture of dread and hope that kept her heart alert, awake, and ready for what was to come. One afternoon, while walking through a quiet park near their home, Sophia reflected on the subtle shifts in her marriage, on Daniel's quiet insistence that she share herself fully, and on the moments at the retreat where she had felt truly seen, truly heard, and she realized that the unthinkable choice was not a betrayal but a reckoning, an opportunity to embrace emotional honesty, to face her own heart courageously, and to acknowledge that love and loyalty could coexist with self-awareness and personal growth. That being true too herself did not diminish her commitment but could deepen it, if approached with clarity and compassion, and with that thought, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps this moment, however challenging, could bring her closer to understanding the full scope of her own heart. Evenings became a mixture of quiet reflection and gentle conversations, where Daniel, aware yet subtle, continued to encourage openness without demanding confession, and Sophia found herself slowly gaining confidence to explore her feelings, to acknowledge the emotions stirred by Ethan and Adrian without judgment, and to understand that desire, attraction, and connection were not inherently wrong, but part of being human, part of the intricate dance of the heart, and she began to realize that the unthinkable choice was less about action and more about awareness, about the courage to sit with complexity, to navigate her emotions responsibly, and to approach her relationships with honesty, empathy, and mindfulness, recognizing that love required both freedom and responsibility, both passion and patience. As the week progressed, Sophia allowed herself small moments of introspection, walking alone through sunlit streets, feeling the wind brush against her face, and reflecting on the duality of her emotions, the pull of familiarity and the thrill of awakening, understanding that she could honor Daniel while also honoring herself, and that the journey of emotional reckoning required patience, courage, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty, for the heart was rarely straightforward, rarely bound by simple rules, and yet, in the complexity, there was a profound beauty, a chance to grow, to deepen understanding, and to build connections that were honest, meaningful, and enduring. One evening, Daniel suggested they sit together on the balcony, where the lights of the city flickered softly against the night sky, and as they shared a quiet moment of togetherness, Sophia felt the tension within her ease slightly, replaced by a gentle clarity, a recognition that the unthinkable choice she had feared was not a single act but a series of conscious, heartfelt decisions, each guided by awareness, integrity, and empathy, and she realized that her love for Daniel could coexist with the acknowledgement of her own needs, that loyalty did not require denial of self, and that emotional honesty was the bridge between commitment and personal fulfillment. And in that realization, she felt a delicate sense of freedom, a quiet empowerment that came not from drama or confrontation but from understanding, compassion, and the courage to embrace her truth. Nights became a time of reflection, where Sophia allowed herself to process the spectrum of emotions stirred by her experiences, from longing to excitement, from guilt to hope, and she understood that each feeling was valid, each response a part of the human heart, and that by acknowledging rather than suppressing them, she could approach life and love with greater authenticity, insight, and grace. And as she lay in bed, listening to the soft rhythm of the city outside, she felt a profound shift within her, a quiet transformation that had begun at the retreat and continued in the ordinary moments of home life, a realization that the unthinkable choice was, in essence, an invitation to embrace life fully, to honor love in all its dimensions, and to act with integrity, empathy, and courage, knowing that the heart's capacity for growth, understanding, and connection was limitless when approached consciously and kindly. The days that followed were filled with small acts of courage and tenderness, where Sophia communicated with Daniel openly about her feelings without naming names or details that might hurt, instead sharing reflections on her emotional state, her newfound awareness, and her longing for depth, understanding, and authenticity. And in these conversations, she noticed a subtle shift in their relationship, a softening, a deepening of connection, a recognition that love could grow stronger when nurtured with honesty, empathy, and attentiveness. and that the unthinkable choice she had feared was transforming into a journey of shared growth, mutual respect, and the delicate balancing of hearts, needs, and desires. One afternoon, Sophia revisited her memories of the retreat, recalling Ethan's patience, his gentle listening, and Adrian's joyful presence, and she allowed herself to integrate those experiences without shame, understanding that connection and emotional resonance could exist without disrupting her commitment, and that her capacity to feel deeply and authentically was a gift, not a threat, and in that awareness, she found strength, courage, and clarity, realizing that life, love, and marriage were not static, but evolving, and that the choices we face are rarely simple, often requiring reflection, honesty, and bravery, and that embracing these moments consciously allows the heart to expand, deepen, and thrive. As Sophia moved forward, each day brought opportunities to act with kindness, awareness, and intentionality, to navigate her relationships with care, and to honor both her love for Daniel and her own emotional needs, and she began to see the unthinkable choice not as a burden but as a path towards self-discovery, emotional maturity, and authentic connection, a journey that demanded patience, reflection, and courage, and in embracing it, she discovered a sense of peace, freedom, and empowerment that allowed her to engage fully with life, love, and herself. Understanding that the heart's capacity for growth is limitless when nurtured with honesty, compassion, and courage, and that even in complexity, beauty, depth, and fulfillment are possible. And as she stood on the balcony one evening, looking at the horizon, Sophia felt the quiet, profound satisfaction of a heart learning to navigate the delicate balance of love, loyalty, and self-awareness, ready to embrace life with integrity, authenticity, and emotional courage, fully awake to the depth, possibility, and richness of the human heart, and she understood that her journey, though challenging, was not only necessary but transformative, a testament to the strength, resilience, and expansive capacity of the heart to love, feel, and grow, even when faced with choices that once seemed unthinkable. And in that awareness, Sophia smiled softly, feeling alive, whole, and ready for whatever came next, knowing that the unthinkable choice had become a path towards self-discovery, understanding, and the fullest expression of love she could give and receive, a journey of heart, courage, and truth that would guide her for the rest of her life.